Hi, I'm Kathryn Jean Lopez from the National Review Institute and National Review Magazine, and I'm so delighted to have Grazie Christie with me. Coming from Florida, we are talking today about what everyone's talking about, the death of Pope Francis, which I don't know about you listening here, but Gracie and I had a little exchange already. I was shocked, which felt silly to admit because, of course, we knew he was dying. We knew he wasn't in good health. He had been in the hospital for upwards of a month. We had been on Pope Watch, and yet this morning, Easter Monday, it didn't feel real. I didn't feel ready, because, of course, he's a world figure and we know all the facts, but he's also, for Catholics, a spiritual father. And so, Gracie, what was your reaction? When did you hear the news and how did you receive it?
Well, again, that like as you say, it's all of us who've lost loved ones after long illnesses. At the end, we're shocked and surprised, and it's that final moment, that meeting with death, which is so definitive. It's so final from a material, from a human perspective, right? Of course, as Catholics, as Christians, we don't see we don't believe in the finality of death, but still, it really it sort of stabs you
Mhm.
when someone that's important to you draws that last breath, even if you're very much expecting it. My daughter, I was telling you earlier, my daughter was very fortunate. She spent Holy Week in Rome with a nice bunch of Catholic girls on a religious trip, and she got to see the Pope for his last three public appearances.
That's
And
amazing.
she called us from Rome and told us, yeah, she's really shocked this morning. She said, I can't believe that I was there and I saw him with my own eyes. She was very shocked at his weakness, at his frailty, his difficulty in speaking and the few words that he spoke in public. And she called us from Rome and said, "He's going to die very soon. He looks just like my grandfather did right before he died."
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and that really impressed me. And I think it's a testament to the way that his papacy was characterized by a kind of merciful um, uh, a merciful engagement with the world, that he would push himself on the verge of death and literally hours before his death to make that last connection with his flock, right? Like the shepherd, he always used to say, the shepherd has to smell of his flock. And so he left us like that. I have goosebumps as I think about it, that he left
Yeah.
us after sallying forth into his flock and letting them feel the accompaniment of the Holy Father that last time.
Well, as you said that, I was thinking of JD Vance, and we saw that little video of the unexpected in the end, kind of rare Easter Sunday visit that they had. We saw the video and all I could think is, "Oh my goodness, this man is suffering." Of course, this morning at one point I thought, gosh, I'm really jealous of JD Vance that he got to be with Pope
Yes.
Francis the last day of his life. But the reason I bring it
Wait, and
up
JD
is
Vance, I'm sorry, JD Vance is a brand new Catholic practically. And he
right,
gets
right, right, a baby Catholic, as we
a
say.
baby Catholic and he gets to see him out.
Yeah, well, and I was thinking while you were talking about why Pope Francis, I wonder why he made himself do that. But I think it might be how he pushed himself to go to St. Peter's Basilica to make that pilgrimage visit. It's a pilgrimage year of hope to through the Holy Door, and he ran into this 90-something-year-old nun who was doing the same thing. Um, um, Maybe it also was the same reason he used to drive me crazy because he would interview this dude who is an atheist newspaper columnist. And I can't remember his name for the life of me right now, but he did multiple quote interviews with him. And so basically, he sits down with this guy, and the guy doesn't take notes. So he writes a column based on his impressions and interpretations of what the Pope said. And
Yeah.
who knows if it's true or not? And some of the columns were controversial, and it was very early on in the pontificate. But it would drive me crazy because like once you're burned once, you don't go back, right? For a second. But it was so important to Pope Francis that he have a relationship with this man. And this is how you have a relationship with, a news columnist or newspaper columnist. And so he respected where he was coming from and where he could meet him. And I do wonder if part of the reason he pushed himself to meet with the Vice President of the United States was knowing that he was a convert, a fairly recent convert, and knowing, frankly, and I'm not saying he was thinking of it this strategically, but I bet it was in his heart and in his mind, knowing that if he were to die soon, the Pope, the only interaction the Pope and JD Vance would have had would have been that letter on immigration, kind of scolding JD Vance. And you know what? JD Vance may be a Republican and an American, which we're led to believe the Pope aren't the Pope's favored people. Regardless, that's another topic. Um, but you know what JD Vance is? A child of God, and the Pope is Holy Father of the world's Catholics. And so he was meeting the vice president as such, as a child of God. And
Like
one of his
a real pastoral heart to heart moment, right? Like
very
he met
pastoral.
him as an intimate meeting, very pastoral. I am the Holy Father. I'm your Holy Father. And we don't have to see eye to eye on things. And I don't have to understand you that well, because I think what characterized, and as you said, that's another topic, but I think what characterized Pope Francis's relationship with America was, I think, a lot of misunderstanding, frankly,
Yeah.
of the American spirit. Because Pope Francis obviously had a big, beautiful, capacious, and embracing heart, right? But there were things I don't think he understood very well about us as Americans. But he was there in that pastoral moment for JD Vance.
And
That
again,
is
a whole
very, who
other
knows? Who
conversation.
knows what
Oh,
that's going to mean, right?
right. What will that mean going down the line for Vance and his family? And
And the country, because he is the vice president, and maybe one day he'll be president.
right. And I thought too, again, from this little video we saw, Vance very much seemed to approach Pope Francis as not necessarily, I mean, obviously he's the world figure, but as a man who was suffering and his pastor who was suffering.
Yes.
And I thought it was just beautiful how Vance said that he prayed for him. And as we keep saying, a whole nother conversation, but I also think too, misunderstandings we have of, very often I think Americans think that everyone's talking directly to them. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes
Yes.
the
Yes.
Holy Father may have been putting America in its place. Like you aren't the exact whole world. And of course, that's borne
Yeah.
out in some of the appointments he made to the College of Cardinals and attention and focus he put on the peripheries, as he put it.
Mm-hmm.
Appointing so many cardinals from Africa and places, frankly, some people have never heard of. Um, and so anyway, yeah, I think the story is so much more complicated than we make it out to be. But such
And
is the life
another
of
thing
headlines.
that made things complicated for us is that for a vast majority of Catholics and non-Catholics alike, what we think we know about Pope Francis is what people are reporting on the press, like this atheist journalist that you're talking about, and what we don't do, many of us, is we don't deepen our understanding of who Pope Francis was and the things that he cared about through reading things like encyclicals. And there's a book of sermons that he gave to young people. I forget the name right now. I have it here. I keep it here because periodically I open it and I look through it. Beautiful, really gorgeous short talks, homilies that he gave to groups of young people in ways. I mean, you really see this. He had this ability to connect, to your common man on the ground. Like there was very little. He didn't have the, I don't know, maybe it was part and parcel of that sort of lack of pomp and circumstance that he rejected from the beginning when he became pope. But there was a kind of intimacy about him when he spoke to people and related to people, and even in his writings, that is maybe now that he has passed away, maybe people will maybe take the time to discover that Pope Francis, and not the Pope Francis of polemical discussion, and oh, he said this and then he said that and everyone's so mad. I mean, there's a beautiful man inside, maybe enveloped in sort of the controversy that unfortunately the modern world, we live on controversy, right?
Right.
That's what gets clicks. So there's a lot of beauty there. I hope that people, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, delve into that beauty.
Yeah, and it was very often during his pontificate. It was only the interviews on the plane rides back from somewhere that
Yeah.
seemed to get the
Yes.
attention, an impromptu kind of comment. Um, but as you say, there's so many beautiful homilies, so many things that didn't necessarily make headlines that can change lives. I remember
Mm-hmm.
early on, he would give celebrate mass and give the homily at Santa Marta where he was living, just regular daily masses, and they would publish after the fact an excerpt from the homily. And as you said earlier, they were very down to earth. And I'm told that in the Italian, if you know the turns of phrases and things, they were even more familiar. Now, I also understand that a lot of curial priests often thought he was yelling at them in the homilies, which may or may not have been true. But the way I received them is, yeah, they were challenging, actually, challenging to every Christian. In the best of ways, the way a pastor should be challenging us. And so I really appreciated them. And sometimes I kind of was a little taken aback, thinking, "Oh gosh, is the Pope yelling at me?" So I understand if you were working at the Vatican, if how you might have felt that way. But fast forward to COVID, um, I I wrote about this morning a little bit. I actually found myself waking up or going to sleep really bizarre hours because when I couldn't go to church, I would pray every morning with Pope Francis, because they were televising his masses live, and every day his homily would be directed at a particular audience, like physicians or nurses or yeah, different people in different walks of life, parents, who are scared. And I remember at the Catholic prayer breakfast this year, in fact, JD Vance talked about being a scared new dad during COVID, and really appreciating Pope Francis when he went out into St. Peter's Square in the dark, rainy
Oh,
night,
yes.
for
Impressive.
that beautiful prayer service, and really appreciating that. Yeah, I think that people who had the opportunity to appreciate a little bit of what we had in him beyond the controversies and the headlines, I think had actually intimate relationships with him in the way
Mhm.
that you would a pastor, even if you're
I'm
not,
glad
in his church, in his parish church.
I'm glad you bring up that beautiful moment when he gave that in the dark St. Peter's,
Yeah.
the piazza. But because he was the master of these moments, right? He seemed to seek them or find them, or they followed him around because of the way his heart was. But he had this way of creating these special occasions that made your heart stop for a moment, right? And say, oh, right. So, for instance, the washing of the feet. He didn't wash the feet of uh, very influential or elite people who came to the Vatican to have their feet washed on Holy Thursday. He went to the prison and washed prisoners' feet, and just time after time that he was able to transcend our expectations, right?
Right.
To lift us up over that hump of being used to things and the habits that we have and the way our sort of our sclerotic vision. He had a way of knocking down those barriers and lifting us past that. Um, and that was spectacular that he had that. I know that for many traditional minded Catholics, I don't like to say like right and left or liberal and progressive because those terms don't apply to Catholics.
They're not,
A
yeah,
lot of traditional
they're
minded,
not proper church terms.
they're not church terms, but maybe traditional minded or Catholics, some of the things that happened during his papacy left us a little, or left them a little discombobulated sometimes. And again, a lot of that probably had to do with the journalistic discourse around it, right? Like um, people wanting to make waves where there weren't any, or make a tidal wave where there was a ripple. Because in the end, what changed? Nothing has changed, of course. I
Right.
mean, the church is unchangeable. So, but yeah, he had that capacity to make those to lift us up past those hurdles. It was a really lovely thing.
Well, I remember at one point, sometime in his first year as Pope, I got a little peeved because people were acting like Pope Benedict never hugged a baby in
Yes.
his Wednesday audience, and he did. But you know what? It doesn't matter because people were paying attention like they weren't paying attention before. And maybe
Yes,
that's what we
exactly.
needed. We needed the Latin
Hmm.
American flair, or we just there needed to be some element that we were previously lacking. And when we talk about going back and reading Francis now, I mean, the same thing in different ways could have been said if we were having this conversation after Benedict resigned, because Benedict gave the richest, most beautiful, for
Mm. Yes,
instance,
he did.
Wednesday audiences on holy men and women. The most beautiful thing I ever read on St. Anthony of Padua, who most Catholics think of as the guy you ask to help find your car
Yes.
keys, right? but, but in reality, he was this mystic saint and brilliant pastor. And anyway, Benedict helps me appreciate that more. Similarly, when we go back and read Francis, as we were saying, I think that there are aspects of him people are going to discover for the first time. And I think a key part of that is his identity as a Jesuit.
Mm.
And in specifically, and conservatives sometimes makes jokes about Jesuits being more liberal than say Dominicans. But the beautiful thing about Jesuits and the treasure that St. Ignatius Loyola gave the church is his spiritual exercises, which
Yes.
are rules for discerning in prayer what the will of God for your life is, in various situations, not just vocational, like the big vocational questions. And I felt, especially early on in his papacy, like he was walking us through the exercises. I had gone through the
Mm.
30-day exercises myself um um fairly recently then, and I thought, gosh, he's like a spiritual director to the world, helping us learn how to be Christian again or anew. um and one thing I wanted to talk to you about, because also in that you were talking about how the stage seemed to be set, or it followed him around, or I remember going back to the kissing of the babies. There was one man in particular. There were many instances, but there was one man in particular who he embraced one day during his audience, whose face was so disfigured. And
I know exactly what you mean.
and you knew he needed that embrace, and you also knew that he represented a whole lot of people in the world who feel alone, who feel like their insides look like his face was outwardly. And when Pope Francis, and I really want to talk to you about this because we were in Philadelphia together when Pope Francis was there. when he was here in the US, he talked about, I remember at Catholic University, he talked about how we go through life anesthetized, how
Mhm.
we find ways to dull the pain because we don't know how to suffer, and we don't know that it has meaning, and we just don't know how to deal sometimes. And I thought, my goodness, do you have our number? You understand what, for a pope who we thought didn't have any interest in us, he actually, as Americans, um, he actually understood us quite well. And a lot of those images that were giving people a moment to take a second look at the church, people were taking a second look because they resonated so deeply in the human heart. What was your experience
Well,
following
you've
him in?
heard,
Go ahead.
we've heard, and I don't know if the statistics have been done, but we've heard that this past Easter Sunday was a tremendous day for new Catholics, just sheer numbers of new Catholics. I keep seeing this in the news and on X, and people reporting, I don't know, 80 something new Catholics in the San Francisco Cathedral.
Yeah.
Just, I keep seeing it. There must be something to it. And
Yeah, well,
and I
some
do
bishops have
believe that,
weighed in with actual numbers, but then, as you were saying, if you just watch social media over the weekend, people were just reporting in from their Holy Saturday
yes.
Mass, Vigil
Hmm.
Mass for Easter.
So, so I believe that the Holy Spirit gives us the Pope that we need,
Hmm.
and He gives us the Pope that we need each time, and it's inscrutable to us in many ways, right? Because there's a spiritual battle that's being waged around us that is more real than the material world that we live in. I believe, and the Pope, whoever the Pope might be at that moment, he is this huge component of this spiritual battle, and I would not be surprised if at the end of his papacy, where he threw open the doors and windows to the church. I mean, he was very specific about that. I want the doors and windows open. I want, the courtyards filled with people. I want all the banners out, calling to all the sons and daughters of God. This is your home. Come home. Be here where you can be loved and shepherded and taken to heaven. And I wouldn't be surprised if after, the 12 years of his papacy, we do have an upsurge in Catholicism, because he was hitting a note that had to be hit. Like, there was a note that had not been played somehow in the Great Symphony of God. And he was playing it. And he did that in the United States when we saw him in Philadelphia in ways that maybe we weren't comprehending at the time. But I think that as the years go on, and we are able to, to put his papacy into historical perspective, and a lot of it'll depend on who the next pope is, of course. Um, we will be able to sort of understand that symphony better, and of how God was playing, this music that is bringing souls into the church.
I remember when Rolling Stone put him on the cover. And
Yeah.
the piece was actually kind of a warning to him. Like, you better be the great liberal hope that we think you are, great progressive hope we think you are. And
I'm going to guess they were a little disappointed.
that's exactly what I was going to say. And I don't say that because we're right wing and we want to win. I say that
No.
because it's more complicated. The human heart is more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
What God knows we need is more complicated than that. And one of the things he talked about so often was he warned people against staying in ideological silos.
Yes.
Um, like you were saying, we shouldn't be describing the church as right and left, conservatives and liberals. We have the gospel. He talked about how the Beatitudes are our identity cards as Christians. And that's where we need to be living. And that doesn't fit well with either political platform here in
Mm-hmm.
the United States. And I remember years ago, speaking of Philadelphia, the now former Archbishop Chaput, who hosted Pope Francis when he was in Philadelphia for the World Meeting of Families, he said in an interview once with Raymond Arroyo, if you had asked me decades ago which party would become the party of unlimited abortion, I would have never thought the Democrats, because the Democrats were filled with Catholics. And so if Catholics are being Catholic, they wouldn't have allowed that to happen, right? And you can criticize Republicans on plenty of things, including we've had prominent Republican politicians who have been pro-abortion, who are Catholic, and but we always need to be in politics, in the public square, in our personal lives, discerning what the gospel is teaching us, what Catholic social teaching is teaching us, and guiding and really relying on the Holy Spirit. You were talking, Gracie, about how you believe the Holy Spirit, and we do believe the Holy Spirit directs the conclave, and the papal conclave that elects the Pope, and that's if Pope Francis had one more thing to tell us, he probably would have told us to pray for his eternal soul, because that's the first thing he asked us to do, to pray for him when he came out as Pope Francis. And he'd probably ask us to pray for the conclave, pray for the cardinals, who will be gathering soon to elect a new pope. And they model, in a way, obviously this is a very specific task, but they model in a way the way we need to live our lives, of relying on the Holy Spirit guiding us in a real
And a
steer
lot of, and with
way,
trust, you with a
I
lot of
should say.
trust, right? And I think also very much an acknowledgement that we don't know everything, and we are living on a very small scale compared to, we've got salvation history. There's salvation history is going on. We're a tiny thread in that tapestry, and we think we understand a lot because we look around and we have this little space that we feel confident in and competent to navigate. But it's a vast project that God has, right? Like God has
Right,
this vast project in His hands, and it requires radical trust. And
right,
I do think that the conclave does model that kind of the way we need to know that the same way that the Holy Spirit's in charge of who's going to be the next pope, and how that papacy is going to affect the entire world. Because let's face it, this is not just about the world's 1 point whatever billion Catholics. The Pope is significant to everybody
right.
because he is an emblem and a symbol and a model, and he means he stands, he makes a big impact on the entire world stage. So we trust that the Holy Spirit's going to manage that properly in a way that advances the flourishing of mankind right towards our ordered to the right ordered end, which is for all of us to go home at last to our Father. We have to trust that too in our own lives. So I think that would be a good way to look at the conclave, right? Lots of trust and peace, because just the same way that Pope Francis, over his papacy, made people a little uncomfortable and worried, and things are going off the rails. The next pope's going to do that too, maybe for a different set of people. That doesn't change, but we have to have trust.
Well, my friend Mike Aquilina, who writes a lot about church history, he was always reminding people, especially early on in the papacy, we're experiencing a pope like we've never really experienced a pope before. Like hanging on every word, every
Oh yeah,
syllable, every
true.
tweet. You know, I remember the late Cato Byrne saying to me once, I was kind of frustrated because I don't know, there was some tweet about it had something to do with income inequality, and I thought I had to stop everything and have a corner post on National Review Online about it, and what income inequality means, not in a political sense, but in a moral sense. And Kate just like laughed at me, and she's like, Kathryn, you don't have to comment on every single sentence or syllable that comes from the Pope's mouth. Or not even in that case,
Or
it was a
whoever,
tweet. It was
or whoever's tweeting for him.
or whoever's tweeting for him. I actually remember the first time a pope tweeted. I happened to be in Rome in Paul VI audience hall when poor Benedict looked like he was seeing an iPad for the first time in his life and presumably really pressing the button, but I have my doubts. Maybe somebody else was doing it. But yeah, sometimes when we can live our lives, those of us who spend too much time on social media, uh, thinking that this is reality and everybody's living with the same priorities and sense of proportion that you're living if you're on X all day. No, there's a bigger world. I mean, you were talking, Gracie, about like God's plan. I mean, you don't even have to get that deep to realize there's more to life
Not
than
that deep.
whatever we're
Just like the
talking about
plan
on
of your
Twitter.
day. Just like the plan. Yeah, just like the plan of your day, like all the good things you have to do today and the things you should avoid. Like that's enough to keep you occupied, right?
Correct, correct.
Yeah,
And
you don't. Well, the first part of X is the 3 a.m. X, right? Like you wake up and and you're like, the world's been going on. Something horrible might have happened. Let me check. That's a bad impulse.
well, I actually saw Dan Lipinski, the former Democratic congressman, tweeting something about he woke up at some in the middle of the night and looked at his phone and saw the Pope had died and he was restless for the rest of the night. And the poor man, we shouldn't keep our phones next to our beds. He deserved a couple more hours of sleep. We don't need to know at 3:30 in the morning that the Pope died. Unless you're going to be on morning TV at 5 a.m., you probably don't need to know. So maybe even his death helps us put things in perspective. Did you have a favorite moment when he was here in the United States, or just a favorite moment, period, of Pope Francis's time?
Well, more than a moment, because there were many favorite moments. More than a moment, I think that one of his encyclicals, I think is going to be, or ought to be, a very important mark of his papacy, something that will resonate for a long time. I hope it gets the attention it deserves, and I'm referring to Laudato Si, which was his encyclical on the care of the earth. And I've spent a lot of time reading that and studying that, and I do think that in a very important way it connects the correct dots for a world. Let's face it, a world that is obsessed with climate and the environment, and that discourse of climate and the environment is running so many parts of our lives without us even maybe stopping to pay attention, right? I mean, um, it runs the economy and the way that people are approaching this idea of how you take care of the earth properly, like how are we our proper stewards of God's gift of creation. It's a very important thing. It's worthy of study and it's worthy of discernment. I don't think the modern environmental movement gets it right. I think that Pope Francis in his encyclical Laudato Si got it right. There were some parts which maybe were I don't know, that you could quibble with, um, that I certainly can quibble with, but the overall encyclical, I would be wonderful if the environmental movement read that encyclical and saw through the eyes of Pope Francis that, and I think here channeling Saint Francis of Assisi, that God has given us this great gift. The gift of creation is a gift to us, and we have to be stewards of this gift, and in a way that maximizes the correct flourishing of man, not in a way that worships the earth in a sort of a pagan worship kind of way, which I think the modern environmental movement falls into that very often.
Mhm.
So that's one hope I have, and one thing that for me I think really really helped me to see the world in a new way by Pope Francis.
It's so important to talk about Laudato Si because it wasn't a political document. And it
Mhm.
was taken by both sides in many cases as a political document. And so the left in many cases embraced it and the right rejected it in many cases. And I'm sorry, I don't I would say I don't care about air conditioning regulations, which were mentioned in there at one point, but I probably do because I
Yes.
like my air conditioning in August. Um, but my point is there was a lot of criticism of that. Why is there that in there? I remember in Pope Benedict's encyclical on hope, there was something about a world government. I'm like, what does that have to do? But in both of these cases, it wasn't the most important part of the documents.
Mhm.
These things that we have legitimate concerns, questions, arguments about. Um, I thought from again, lack of a better way to describe it, a conservative perspective, it was a huge missed opportunity because
Yes.
as he's talking about creation and us being good stewards of creation, he's not just talking about the rivers and the birds. He's talking about man and marriage and as part of creation. And there was room for everyone to learn from this document. And anyway, so I would encourage people to go back and because at the end of the day, yeah, we're really lousy stewards of creation. And all you have to do, I mean, follow me
We
around
are.
a day in the office in New York where, maybe I buy a coffee and a disposable cup and and people can get a little too hyper about not using disposable things. But you know what? The Sisters of Life, who I adore, Catholic nuns here in New York and elsewhere, they reuse their Ziploc bags. And
Mhm.
there's something to be said for that. And
There
I'm not
is.
saying
It's
make it a law, but like,
well,
why do we throw things out so easily?
let's remember his great phrase, a throwaway culture. Right? So we have this throwaway culture. You use the cup one time and out it goes. You drink water out of plastic bottles for no reason because the water from the tap is really good.
Right,
And so you just turn it on and you drink it. And then you throw it away. And then that kind of throwaway mentality, of course, filters down to throwaway humans,
right,
right? I mean, you can't separate your throwaway mind. You can't separate the humans outside of, from that part of your brain that throws away and throws away and throws away.
right.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's all part of one, big whole. And he also had that great phrase, probably not his, but human ecology, right? So
Mhm.
there's ecology, but the reason for the ecology is the human ecology, right? It's like the reason that all the professions exist is to this is Chesterton, right? The reason for the existence of all the professions is to maintain the most important profession, which is motherhood, right? And the
Mhm.
child, the next generation, right? So the reason for the to protect the ecology is because there's a human ecology, and and that all of that has to work together. It has to be
Right.
part of a whole. It has to make sense, and also be oriented upward, right? Like be oriented toward away from the throwaway culture where nothing is worth anything. As soon as we're done with it, right? Like as soon as our interest pales and we look in the other direction, well, all that stuff just out the window, whether that's a human being or a paper cup, right? So we have to we he and I think his whole papacy was about this. I think his whole papacy was about uh making 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 our lives out of a whole cloth, right? Like having it all make sense, having
Right.
all the seams meet, be sewn together
Being
properly, and
actually
no
coherent with the way we live our lives.
coherent.
Yeah.
Exactly. Real integrity, from top to
Real
bottom.
integrity.
Real integrity. And always aiming up, right? Like always aiming up and out. Like always up and out. Not turned in on myself, worried about, my little worries, but always up and out.
Because we're constantly focused on Christ, seeing Christ in others, for
Mhm.
the miracle of seeing Christ in ourselves, if we're baptized, we have the Trinity living within us. I remember at one point, he may have said this more than once, I think he did. we have the doxology. Glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit. And if you pray the rosary, you say it a lot. And as you pray the rosary. And I think this was during one of his audiences. He said, and I paraphrase, but why aren't we in awe when we say that? Glory be to the Father. There was an aspect of him, and maybe it's because he's Hispanic and he felt things deeply and with a flair, not to caricature, but there was a childlike passion about him in the best of ways, because he didn't want us to take for granted the gifts that we have. And Laudato Si again points to that in so many beautiful ways. And the aspects, and we would be remiss, you mentioned this, he was named Pope Francis. We would be remiss if we didn't focus on this a little bit. Named after St. Francis of Assisi. And I remember being in Rome when he was elected, and that night and the next morning, everybody, the guy at the hotel front desk, the cab drivers, everybody, the person you got your coffee from, everybody was just so excited because it was this beloved Italian saint he had
Yeah.
taken his name after. Um, but one of the unappreciated things I think about Francis is, yes, he loved animals. He also loved Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. And he also had this sense of awe that in being a good steward of the earth, in being having that proper dominion, right? As a human in the world with the animals and with all of this, you have the opportunity to worship God because he's given us these gifts, and
Mm.
to never underestimate how powerful that can be.
The
And
order, the order of creation,
right.
right? That there's an order in creation and that it's all infused with majesty and grandeur,
Yeah.
top to bottom. And Pope, sorry, Saint Francis of Assisi in his poem, right, Laudato Si, in the poem itself, he ends with Sister Death,
Mm.
and he praises, he gives thanks to God for death. I I've been thinking about that Pope Francis died on Easter Sunday morning, or Monday, or Easter Monday
Easter
morning.
Monday morning.
I'm sorry, Sunday night, Monday morning. Um, Giving thanks to Sister Death, I'm sure, right, for being part of the order of creation, like his release to his heavenly home. Um, not an easy process, not an easy step to take for any of us. We're all going to take that step, but giving thanks to God, because that is in the order of creation, and there's glory in that. There's glory everywhere if we could just open our eyes and see it. Pope Francis, Saint Francis of Assisi, he shared with Saint Francis of Assisi that way of seeing that glory in creation and sharing that with us.
And again, appreciating where yesterday on Easter Sunday, he obviously was not in the prime of his life, and he didn't have to go out and he didn't have to meet with the Vice President of the United States, but he did, and there was a power in that. Even if it wasn't the same power that it would have had 7 years before, or when he was in a different state of life. There's power there.
Did you
Um,
see, were you struck by the similarities in the passion, the passion of Christ, the sort of the passion of Francis?
oh yeah.
So he makes his first appearance finally on Good Friday. I think
Hmm.
that was the first time that he had been back to St. Peter's since
Well,
his
he had made a previous
and
one,
then he struggles through the weekend.
but yes,
Maybe
his
one
main
previous one.
final
I don't know.
appearances
I
were
was I
Holy
was
Week.
struck by
Yes.
the way that his yeah. So he was like accompanying Christ through his
Yeah.
passion. I mean, he was there on the cross. He was on his own cross there, standing up as on Golgotha somehow, and then dies, and I believe is alive again before the throne of the Father on Easter Monday. it's really very beautiful. It's very moving when
Well,
you
and
think
you
of
can
how
also look
he,
at all of Lent as this
Mhm.
final penance in his earthly life, you
Yes.
know. We believe that our souls need purification,
Mhm.
because the first thing in the first interview that was ever done with him as Pope Francis, when he was
Yeah.
asked who is Jorge Maria Bergoglio, he said, "I'm a sinner.
I'm a
I'm a
sinner.
sinner."
Mhm.
And so I do
And
believe
nothing
he'd want us to
purifies.
pray for him.
Nothing purifies like illness. Nothing purifies like illness and disability because you entrust your life to others. You entrust your
Right.
dignity to others. You entrust your pain to others. You give over your control, right? You become like a baby again, hoping that someone remembers to come by and turn you over or, you know, pat your cheek
Yeah,
when
having to
you're
rely on
lonely.
people for the most basic things. There's such humility in that. Humiliation too, that
Humiliation.
yeah. And yeah, there's real penance that can be worked through that. And that's part of the mystery of faith. And and uh and it also I think also, you know, that's kind of a final sermon to us um from him. But I'm also reminded too, I mean, we have no idea what his prayer was during, or we have little inclinations from little updates and things. But he spent a month in the hospital, and what was his prayer life? You know, at what points was he able to pray? At some points you can't pray in sort of the traditional way if you're, you know, if you're depending on the medicine you're taking, etc. What did that look like? What was that like? And and what miracles were being worked? Because we really do believe that God does things with our prayers and sufferings that we'll honestly never know about. And the reason I just wanted to say that is because one of my moments that I'll never want to forget about Pope Francis was it was a Friday in June, I believe, right after he was elected. And I woke up to, and I did the thing where I looked on my phone immediately, which I shouldn't do when I wake up, most jarring way to wake up. But he appeared with Pope Benedict, and at the time that was a rarity. Like it, I
Hmm.
think it was the first time.
I think
He
so.
was in the gardens, the Vatican gardens with Pope Benedict, and they were consecrating the the Vatican, the Holy See and the Vatican to Saint Michael and Saint Joseph. And Catholics pray to Saint Michael for intercession to combat evil.
Mhm.
And Saint Joseph is the saint of purity who protected our Lord and the Blessed Mother. And I just thought, my goodness, first of all, that's probably revealing something to us that we can't fully understand about why Benedict resigned.
Mhm.
But also, it's not in our strategizing at the end of the day. You know, yes, we have to bring all our best talents, which are gifts from God, to the table to combat any problem, to work on any task. But if it is not imbued in prayer, if it doesn't start, if it isn't fueled by prayer, it's not going to get us anywhere. And I just thought that was such a remarkable image, and just Michael and Joseph, like we need them. And God doesn't leave us alone to deal with these problems ourselves. He's got a whole army, we believe as Catholics, of people who have gone before us, who help us, um, who are rooting
And
for
our
us.
angels, our guardian angels,
Guardian angels.
which I think we don't remember as often as we
Right.
should, and don't rely on as much as we should. I mean, they're tasked with our salvation and with our they constantly assist us. in our battle, right? Every life's a battle. Every day's a battle. Every moment feels like a battle sometimes. And it's wonderful to know that Pope Francis's battle is over, and and it looks to me like he that that at the end, as you were saying, there was time for penance, there was time for real humility and humbleness, which is something that we have to hope for all of us. I know I have a priest of my acquaintance, is a young Italian priest here in Miami, who's very holy, and I don't know what we were talking about, but he said to me, "I pray every day for a long, painful, lingering death."
Hmm.
I said, "Oh, Father, I will pray for that for you. I will remember that in my prayers. A long, lingering death for Father David." Um, so Pope Francis had that, and I do think that um, I do think that he made a wonderful exit, and it was wonderful to see him those last few times. Um, just forcing himself to go that last mile, right? Like go
Very
that
much.
extra mile, the extra mile. He went the extra
And
mile
for us to see it, to see
for
it.
us to see it, to teach
Um,
us.
and almost as if he was reminding us of the last days of John Paul II, where he taught
Mm.
us so much about suffering. George Weigel calls it his last encyclical, where he just, instead of
Oh, that's
writing
beautiful.
a
Yes.
brilliant encyclical, he showed us what he wanted to teach us about living in your dying, and yeah,
And that's something as moderns we're falling away from. We're it's becoming harder and harder for us to imagine suffering at the end of our lives as
right.
something um, that can be edifying for us and soul saving for us, and even for the people around us that are watching. So kudos to Pope Francis and Saint John Paul II for living that out to the end as models for us at the end of life.
Well, Gracie, we could talk about so much more for hours and hours and hours about the life of Pope Francis. But for now, thank you so much. I wanted to have you and get some of your first thoughts and impressions, because for people who don't know you, Gracie Christie, you're a doctor. You comment on Catholic matters frequently. You've written some beautiful columns for Angelus in particular, the magazine out of the Los Angeles diocese. And some of the columns that stand out to me the most are about marriage and motherhood and adoption, because you and your husband have an adoptive daughter in addition to biological children. And Pope Francis talked about Saint Joseph, to go back to Saint Joseph, as a foster father, and talked about how
Yeah.
it's not biology
No,
that
it's not.
determines parenthood, it's love.
Mhm.
And of course, Saint Joseph was the foster father of Jesus, and there's so much to unpack and learn from that. That was another that was the writing he did on Saint Joseph in particular. Yeah, just there's so much to unpack there, but so much beauty. And I guess for now we thank God for the gift of Pope Francis.
We do. Thank you for having me, Kathryn. It's a wonderful conversation. I mean, as you say, we can talk forever, and there'll be more to talk about. We're going to see the world now flock to pay him homage, to pay him respects, right? As the spiritual leader of so many Catholics. But again, a person who strode across the world stage and left a mark. And I think it'll be some time before we get a real sense of the mark that he has left on so many hearts and structures across our world, and the way that we relate to each other, to the earth, to the marginalized, to our in our communities. We're going to be parsing that out for some time.
Yeah, as we discussed earlier, there will be a lot of opinions, and there'll be a lot of things to discuss about that as well. But for now, I think the proper thing is to pray. Pray
Yes.
for his eternal rest, and pray for the cardinals as they approach electing a new pope. And Gracie, where do we follow you on X? Is it
I'm at G Christie MD on
G
X.
Christie MD on X, formerly known
Not,
as
don't
Twitter?
listen, don't read anything I write at 3 a.m. I try not to.
And don't read it at 3 a.m. either.
And don't read anything at 3 a.m. because you're going to take the wrong message, I'm sure, from anything you read.
No tweeting at 3 a.m., no reading tweeting at AM 3 a.m. Thank you,
Always
Gracie, and
awake.
thank you everyone for joining us. There'll be a lot more commentary about Pope Francis and the upcoming conclave and the upcoming papacy on National Review and from the National Review Institute. So please join us.